Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into an incredibly true story that starts with a mystery so wild, it honestly feels almost impossible to believe. We are going to unpack the extraordinary life and timeline of Sergeant Daniel Carter. He's a man whose story forces us to stop and ask some pretty profound questions about duty, about sacrifice, and really, the hidden costs of true heroism. So let's jump right in and set the scene.
Picture this for a second. It's a freezing cold morning. You've got this beautiful blue sunrise washing over an old harbor, and there's an elderly man just standing there, all alone at the water's edge. He's wearing a faded World War II American military uniform. His hands are trembling a bit with age, and around his neck, he's wearing dog tags that, according to every official military record on the planet, belong to a man who was declared dead nearly half a century earlier. People walking by naturally just assume he's confused. Maybe an elderly veteran lost in old memories. But then, he turns to the stunned crowd gathering around him and quietly says, "My name is Daniel Carter, and I never came home." And with that one single sentence, he literally shatters 50 years of official history.
So, how on earth does a man stay dead for 5 decades and then just suddenly appear on a harbor? To figure that out, we're going to retrace his exact path, looking at his life in the spring of 1944 in the Midwest, his late 1944 deployment to Europe, and finally, the incredible truth behind his return 50 years later. Let's start back in 1944. Daniel came from this incredibly idyllic background. We're talking a quiet, small farming town in the Midwest, surrounded by those classic golden wheat fields. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody's name. His dad fixed tractors, his mom taught piano to the local kids. Daniel's life was just peaceful. He spent most of his afternoons fishing by this calm little river just outside of town with his younger brother Michael.
He was only 23 years old, and at that age, Daniel absolutely never dreamed of being a soldier. He wasn't looking for a fight. But when the world went to war, he volunteered. And he stepped up for one very simple reason. He firmly believed that protecting the people he loved was worth any sacrifice. Think about the immense weight of that for a second. Walking away from literally everything you know and love, just to keep it safe.
Because Daniel had a lot to lose. He wasn't chasing glory or medals. His dream was so wonderfully grounded. He just wanted to build a house right beside that quiet river he loved to fish at, marry his childhood sweetheart Emma, and raise a family in his hometown. That was it. But he put that entire future, the whole shebang, completely on hold.
And the emotional weight of that sacrifice, it's perfectly captured in this one specific moment. Right before he left for the war, Daniel was standing on the steam-filled train platform in the early morning light. Emma handed him a small, silver pocket watch. She whispered to him, "When this war is over, bring this home." Daniel smiled back at her and promised, "I'll bring myself home too." And as he boarded that train and she waved goodbye with tears in her eyes, neither of them had any idea, no way of knowing, that those would be the last words they'd share for decades.
Fast forward to late 1944, when Daniel's infantry unit landed in Europe. The contrast to his sunny Midwest hometown was just jarring. They walked into this cold, smoke-filled, devastating reality. Entire villages were literally reduced to rubble. You had hungry children digging through destroyed buildings and blown-out churches just hoping to find a scrap of food. Whole families were living in basements because their houses were just gone. In an environment like that, the soldiers figured out pretty quickly that staying alive felt a lot more like blind luck than actual courage.
Now, navigating that kind of chaos really came down to a stark choice for these guys. Do you follow the strict Army handbook, or do you follow your own personal code? While the military obviously demanded strict, unwavering obedience to orders, Daniel quickly became known for his deep compassion. If a kid was starving, Daniel gave up his rations. If an elderly woman was struggling to carry heavy firewood through a ruined street, he'd step in and carry it himself. His best friend in the unit, Private Samuel Reed, used to watch him do this, kind of laugh, and remind Daniel that carrying firewood definitely wasn't in the Army handbook. But Daniel would always just shrug and say, "Maybe not, but it's still the right thing."
And that brings us to this quiet, incredibly tense scene that changes absolutely everything. It's late at night. Heavy rain is pouring through the broken windows of this abandoned schoolhouse. The guys are totally exhausted, huddled around a single flickering lantern. The mood is heavy. Daniel is quietly studying a map, while the rest of the squad tries to get some sleep. And then, out of nowhere, the silence is broken.
This visibly terrified little boy, maybe 10 years old, cautiously creeps into the schoolhouse. His name is Lucas. He's bundled in this worn-out brown sweater, and he's clutching a loaf of stale bread wrapped in cloth. He walks straight up to Daniel and tries to hand it to him. When Daniel gently tries to push it back, telling the kid he needs to keep his own food, Lucas flat out refuses. He looks at Daniel and says, "My mother says heroes don't eat last." Wow. It's just this incredibly intimate human interaction that instantly grounds the massive, overwhelming scale of World War II right down to a single room.
And what Daniel does in response, it perfectly sums up who he was. He kneels down so he's eye level with Lucas, gives him this kind smile, and accepts the bread. Then, he proceeds to break that single loaf into equal pieces for every single soldier in the room. But he makes absolutely sure to give the largest piece right back to young Lucas. That one small, profound act of kindness solidified the trust of his men and set in motion a chain of events that would change more lives than anyone in that rain-soaked schoolhouse could possibly imagine.
All right, new orders and crossing the river. We've officially hit the major turning point of this explainer. Just days after that moment with Lucas, the unit gets new orders, sending them into a fateful night that would quite literally alter history.
So, on paper, this mission looks straightforward enough. Cross the river before dawn, secure a comm station, and hold the line. Command figured, less than 6 hours tops? But the reality was a complete nightmare. First off, a heavy, thick fog rolled in, dropping visibility to almost zero. Then, as they were quietly rowing, the currents pushed their wooden boats entirely off course. Suddenly, hidden enemy gunfire just erupts out of the pitch black, sending water splashing everywhere. Total, absolute chaos took over. The squad was completely separated, and all that meticulous planning instantly vaporized into a desperate fight for survival. You know how it goes when a plan just falls apart? Well, this was that, but with lives on the line. In the middle of all those explosions lighting up the riverbank, Daniel and Samuel quickly realized that staying meant certain death. To survive, they, along with 3 other guys who got separated, bolted into this dense, towering pine forest. Using just their flashlights to barely cut through the fog, they ran deep into the woods, leaving the absolute slaughter of the river behind them. By the time the sun started coming up, the forest got super quiet. Eerily quiet, actually. That soft, golden morning light started filtering through the pine branches. And then, Daniel suddenly stops dead in his tracks. He kneels down in the mud because he spots something totally out of place. Fresh footprints. But actually, scratch that. They weren't just footprints. They were tiny. These weren't heavy military boots. They were the footprints of children. Super cautiously, the 5 men followed these strange little tracks deeper into the trees.
And those tracks led them right to a shocking discovery. Hidden beneath the burnt-out ruins of an old farmhouse was a concealed underground shelter. When Daniel carefully opened the hatch, he found dozens of terrified civilians hiding inside. It was almost entirely women and children. They had been trapped down there in the pitch dark for weeks. They were practically out of food, and their water was completely gone.
It's a gut-wrenching scene. You've got these exhausted families, kids just clinging to their mothers in the dark. And then, the oldest woman in the bunker slowly steps forward. She looks up at Daniel, and in this very broken English, she asks one heartbreaking question. "Are you here to help us?" In that split second, Daniel was thrust into an absolutely impossible moral dilemma. The war, the battlefield, the commanders, all of it faded away, and it all boiled down to this one heavy choice. If he and his men pushed on to complete their official military objective, these defenseless, starving people would undoubtedly be found and killed. But if they stayed behind to protect them, they would be actively, intentionally abandoning their direct orders. I mean, put yourself in his boots for a second. What do? Do you follow the strict oath you swore to the military, or do you save the innocent human being standing right in front of you? For a few agonizing seconds, nobody made a sound. Finally, Samuel whispered to Daniel, asking what they were going to do. Daniel just closed his eyes, took a breath, and made a quiet, world-shifting decision. He looked at his men and said, "We save the people first." By choosing those innocent lives over his military commands, Daniel didn't just seal his own fate. That one single decision ensured those families survived, and it fundamentally altered the entire future of a town.
But listen, a choice like that, it comes with a massive, life-altering consequence. Because they abandoned their post to stand guard that bunker, within 24 hours, every official military report listed Sergeant Daniel Carter as MIA, missing in action. That single, unbelievable act of compassion led the U.S. military to assume he had been killed in the river crossing. He was completely erased from official history for the next 50 years. As far as the world was concerned, Daniel Carter was dead.
Which brings us full circle, all the way back to that elderly man standing on the harbor with a faded uniform and worn-out dog tags.
Daniel Carter sacrificed his good name, his simple dream of that house by the river, and the entire life he knew, all to protect complete strangers hiding in a bunker. So I'll leave you with this final thought as we wrap up. If history only remembers the orders we follow, what is the true cost of doing the right thing? It's an absolutely incredible story of unseen heroism. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope it leaves you with something powerful to think about today.